Hi, James.
Hey, how's it going?
It's good. The White Monkey is doing his thing, and we're here for podcast three. We're going to continue a little bit with some more examples of ancient revolution. James has some good examples for us, and then we will transition to genocide. The balls,
Yes.
you got the ball, James.
So I skipped over the revolutions, and there were numerous of them, political revolutions in small nations, one of which sparked the Peloponnesian War, which would be the Red Face Island War. It's named after an ancient king that was supposedly, by one account, drunk and had a red face, but by another account had been tormented by a deity and had his face scorched. So the Peloponnese is attached to the rest of Greece by the narrow isthmus, where Megara, which means chambers, and Corinth were located. The Peloponnesian War is usually discussed by modern scholars as an analog to the Soviet U.S. Cold War. I think it's more appropriately discussed as an analog to the blue-red political, cultural factionalism within the United States, because the Greeks spoke the same language, and they did band together against external enemies, such as the Persians. And the people of the Peloponnese were primarily agrarian, and there were other inland states in the northern parts, like Thessaly and Boeotia. Boeotia means good cattle land. I think Thessaly means grassland, who were also agrarian. The two dominant maritime powers were Corinth and Athens. Corinth, being the number two maritime power, allied itself with the land powers to try to keep from getting swallowed up by Athens. Athens instigated a revolution, a political revolution from oligarchy to democracy on Corcyra, which is now the modern island of Corfu. It's been variously a British-Russian possession in modern times. And supporting the colonists dragged Corinth into the war, and they were really outgunned by the Athenians, and all these smaller maritime cities, communities, they were small nations, saw themselves being picked off one at a time by the Athenians if the Spartans did not intervene. And the Spartans were technically oligarchs, but they really had a form of monarchy. They were kind of the odd player, and they aligned with the oligarchs against the Democrats. And there are 5 examples of genocides during this, what would be in modern terms a civil war, sparked by political revolutions. There was also religious desecrations. The shrine of Apollo on Delos was defiled. The corpses of the priests were exhumed and thrown out to sea by the Athenians. And it was surmised by Thucydides that since Apollo was the god of plagues, that this act might have been what brought down the horrible plague on Athens that killed Pericles, amongst others. Thucydides did survive this plague, and medical historians still debate over what this plague was, although respiratory distress and fever and delirium were aspects of it. So you have, with the Peloponnesian War, you have a number of things that you wanted to discuss initially: revolution, genocide, and disease all come about, mixed together. And in some ways, it might be the Peloponnesian War might be compared to World War One, which is essentially a European civil war in which these people that ran the countries they had personal relations with each other. They knew each other, just like the leadership and the various Greek city-states actually knew each other. They would get together at the Panhellenic Games. There were 5 different Panhellenic Games that would run on 2 or 4 year cycles. And again, World War One ends with political revolution and a disease, a bad pandemic that killed apparently like 51, 52 million people worldwide. So I don't like the Cold War model for the Peloponnesian War. I would prefer to model as an example of the 30 Years' War, which was essentially a civil war with religious and ethnic overtones, just like the Peloponnesian War, the World War One, but most significantly, the fact that people that spoke the same language and had the same culture had a coastal versus hinterland war that lasted 30 years, in which the coastal people dominated most of the struggle, but eventually the internal cultural cohesion of the agrarian people on the inside, combined with outside help, the Spartans would eventually prevail due to Persian financing. So Peloponnesian War, a perfect analog would be if there was an American Civil War, somehow USG went away, and there was an American Civil War, and then the Chinese financed the rednecks against the coastal, Globo Homo crowd. That would be essentially what the Peloponnesian War would be like in modern terms.
Okay. I have a few questions that are a little bit they're a little bit off topic in regards to revolution and genocide, but they do have to do with Sparta.
Mm-hmm.
Two questions. Number one, we've talked about, or you've talked a lot about like the beating of children in different cultures, and like how that will influence their psychology in being warriors. The Native Americans, which you said we base like our special forces training on and stuff, they never beat their kids, hardly ever, right? And then, but you have like the Spartans, from what I've read, they did beat the kids in the school. And I mean, my idea would be maybe that's because they're trying to get you to fight in a phalanx versus the Native Americans that are doing more like hunting war. Is that
Yes.
why beating was allowed?
Well, and it was encouraged, it was institutionalized, and it was in the contests and all across the Hellenic War world. If 2 fellows were boxing and one was clinching, the referee wouldn't break it up and penalize one guy. He would just start beating the guy that was clinching with his rod until he stopped clinching. So this was, it descends out of a heroic culture in which captured heroes would be beaten. Odysseus, when he went, he did 2 missions inside of Troy. One of them was to spy, another one was to steal an idol of Trojan Minerva. He had his own people beat him so that he would show signs of being ill-used as a slave or a captive when he pretended to desert to the Trojans. So this slave society, and the Hellenic society was a slave society, they depended on beatings a lot. And the soldiers the hoplites, which means shield bearer, based on a hoplon, even though during the period we're discussing they used an aspis instead of a hoplon. They were disciplined as European armies would be disciplined down through history in the infantry by being beaten. This type of conditioning worked well for close quarter combat types of warfare that would be closer to, let's say, football. It didn't work well as a disciplinary measure for light infantry positions where you necessarily had to have a lot of latitude in the mind of the combatant. He had to feel free to make his own decisions. So once firearms get into infantry battle in the gunpowder age at the end of the medieval era, then you have a problem. You have a dilemma because the individual combatant becomes a lot more deadly, but he cannot be allowed outside of the line of battle because he's basically a beaten war slave. He has to be rounded up by grenadiers and kept in the line of march by cavalrymen. So when it was discovered that in episodes like Braddock's defeat and Bacon's rebellion, when 100 Susquehannocks defeat 800 Englishmen, and they're all using the same weapons, it becomes obvious that with firearms you need to go back to the pre-civilized, pre-slave mentality of developing a warrior ethos, which means not breaking their spirit and trusting them to have more creative input into their own combat. And this is what modern infantry combat that was pioneered by Younger and Rommel was all about.
Okay, and my other question is, I don't know if it's true, but I read that the sons of the two kings of Sparta would not go through the military training. They wouldn't go through that.
So the Agogi.
The Goji, right? Is that true? And if
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. Really the authority, and I read the book, and but it's been 20 years ago. A fellow named Cartledge wrote a book titled Spartan Reflections. He's really the authority on the Spartans at this point. So I would reference that book if you want to look that up. If I read a yay or nay on that question, I've since forgotten it.
Okay. And another question pops in my head here. Like in the modern world, our academics, they really try to make the Greeks like homosexual. They really emphasize that. And I mean, I'm sure that there was that going on, but I remember watching like a History Channel episode on Sparta with my dad, and they alluded to like the whole mentor, like older warrior with young Spartan. It was like a love affair thing. But then I was reading on a website about Sparta, and basically they were like contradicting that notion. They said like in the laws, I believe, which were like might have been recorded, the Spartan laws which were recorded, I believe, by Xenophon, I'm not 100% sure, said that that's actually, you would lose your political rights if you had sex, homosexual sex in Sparta, and that it was it was basically illegal. And like Xenophon too, I think, let his own son, according to this website, go through the Agogi.
Yeah, so he was adopted by the Spartans.
Oh, okay. So
LaFond was like Themistocles, the hero of Salamis. He was also adopted by the Spartans, and Xenophon was one of the co-commanders of the 10,000. The other standout was a Spartan. So he developed a close relationship as an Athenian exile with Spartans during his period of life, which was from the about 420 BC into the mid 300s BC. And Cartledge is of the opinion that basically the limited homosexual pederasty amongst the Greek upper class, he was of the opinion that it probably dialed in at around 30%. Okay, now when you look at all male warrior fraternities, this does sometimes happen. There was a lot of this young man with older man stuff amongst the Japanese samurai and daimyo, for instance. So you'll see a greater than normal percentage of this type of homosexual bonding in societies where men are kept separate from the women, which was true for both of them, but in no way was it dominant. And if you look at the heroic era, it's really absent. People want Patroclus to be the lover of Achilles, but it's obvious they both had women, and Patroclus was actually the slave of Achilles. He was bonded out to Achilles' father because he was in exile for murder. Okay, so he's Achilles' attendant, and he has a touching relationship with a female captive that is in love with him, that he has a brief conversation with in the Iliad. So there's no evidence of this in the heroic age. There are charges by Romans, for instance, like Ovid, that Orpheus became a homosexual after his wife was killed. And it was like a form of mourning for him. And these Thracian women eventually murdered him because he'd rather take teenage boys as lovers than women. But again, this is a late antiquity Roman view of very ancient Greek behaviors, but there's no ancients. And the later you get in the late antiquity with characters like Philostratus, the more you'll see these decadent people trying to project homosexuality into the past. And of course, the modern mind is analogous to the late antiquitous mind of the Greco-Romans. Okay, people like Philostratus that are very emasculated, very feminized. So I would be suspicious of all of this. There was the Theban sacred band, which did consist of 75 married pairs of homosexual men. Okay, as far as I can tell, these were the only homos in Thebes, and they paid for it with their life. Alexander the Great executed them all. Okay, just killed them to the last man, didn't let them surrender. That's some evidence right there that, basically the Macedonians are the rednecks of the Greek world, and they didn't approve of this at all.
Oh, okay. So with Macedon, Macedonians, like I read and heard, like I think I watched it on a documentary. Philip II, he supposedly was killed by a lover, like a male lover, a younger boy. I don't know if that's actually true. And then they say Alexander too was bisexual. Is that all propaganda, or
modern people want that? And of course, they're going to take a relationship. They're going to say, well, this is a cupbearer, which would be like a cabin boy. And they're going to say, well, yes, this is a pederastic relationship without evidence. Okay. And if you take the ancient Greek term for love, okay, Phil, that Philip means lover of horses. Well, was he having sex with horses? Probably not. Okay.
Right.
So it's really impossible to sort out at this remove. The candidate for the assassination of Philip is Olympias, his wife. Okay, his Epirot wife. And she's from another corner of rural Greece that still had kings and queens instead of democracies and oligarchies. And this savage bitch is the most likely candidate for conspiring to murder Philip, and it would have been through the equivalent of a page. We don't try to say that all the pages of medieval knights where they're like homosexual lovers or something like that. Again, this is like that homosexual activity is end of civilization, decadent decline stuff. So you might see a bunch of it with people in today's circumstances in the latter stages of Rome, and also maybe even in the latter stages of the Hellenistic world, the 100 years following Alexander. I would expect to see more of this activity where there's birth rate decline. When you're seeing the birth rate decline, particularly among the upper class, as you did in late antiquity Rome and in the latter period of the Hellenistic age, then you can infer a lot of homosexual activity there. But when you got a guy like Philip of Macedon, who's got numerous sons, and he is probably murdered so that the son with the most ability, who is not the heir, Alexander, so that he can assume the throne. In fact, Alexander was really upset about his father being killed, as far as I can tell. He's not implicated in the assassination, but it was an assassination that was done to make sure that Alexander assumed the throne.
Okay.
And probably engineered by his mother. And Alexander was probably assassinated himself. And one of the candidates for this is Aristotle, because Alexander had Aristotle's son murdered.
Okay.
And the symptoms would be consistent with hellebore or hellbane, which was the type of stuff that Aristotle was involved in curating. He was an actual polymath, which would include pharmacy. And Aristotle is most likely assassinated as soon as Alexander perishes. But somebody most likely murdered Alexander, and one of the candidates is Aristotle, is one of the conspirators, but who knows? That's another thing that really can't be sorted out at this great distance.
Well, why did Alexander have Aristotle's son killed? Because that was his teacher.
Callimachus was his name, and I think it was because Callimachus wrote some truthful things about some of the atrocious things that Alexander was doing. Callimachus was sent as a historian of the expedition, and Afghanistan psychologically drove Alexander crazy. He got it done. There's only three people that really pacified Afghanistan: Alexander, Genghis Khan, and Tamerlane. And they all did it through genocide. Alexander probably conducted a dozen genocides in Afghanistan and Pakistan. And he spent as much time pacifying Afghanistan as he did conquering the rest of the world. That was given to them at the time. And this did a lot to destroy the morale of his army. Stephen Pressfield wrote a book called The Afghan Campaign, who he couldn't get published through a major publisher because it reflected very poorly on the military decision to go into Afghanistan, and it was written in 2008. So he couldn't get a major publisher for this because it kind of went against U.S. military activity as a legitimate pursuit in Afghanistan. And it demonstrates how Alexander psychologically, he goes insane in Afghanistan. Something like 8 to 14 races of people pay for it with extinction. And his army ultimately mutinies and refuses to go further into India.
Oh, well, this kind of brings us into, our main topic, genocide.
Yes.
Now, did they mutiny because of the the PTSD of the genocide, or just because they didn't want to go any farther, they missed their homes, or a combination of all of that?
These guys were happy killing all day long. In
Yeah.
fact, the Silver Shields, the 3 battalions of the foot companions, continued to fight until they were about 70 years old. They
Wow.
were they would sell themselves to the highest bidder. I think eventually two of the successors of Alexander decided just to kill these bastards because they kept switching sides and saying, "Yeah, well, we'll fight for the highest bidder." They became kind of like the Swiss in the late medieval world. So no, it was the Macedonians or the heartless hillbillies from hell, and they hadn't seen their own families in almost 20 years. They had all the wives they could want. Each one of these guys could have 100 pretty Asian chicks of all
Yeah.
these different exotic races. And after spending, I think, 5 years wiping out Afghanistan, uh, they then go down into the Indus Valley and they fight Porus. He's a hero king on an older model. And Porus actually ends up, after giving the Macedonians the hardest fight they've ever had. It was the only battle that was kind of like in the balance. And they took some casualties. And Porus actually adopts Alexander as his son after this battle, and they make peace. And Alexander finds out how big India is, and he wants to conquer it all. And his men realize that they are now going, it's 30,000 of these guys. They've taken casualties. They're still getting reinforcements from home, but they're starting to have to beef themselves up with these Asiatic auxiliaries, which they don't trust a whole lot. And they're now going to be plowing into massive armies of men that aren't going to run away. They're going to fight. Okay, so they were looking at the type of combat that the Romans saw in Gaul, where it's going to be a real meat grinder, and they knew it. Nobody knew more about that mode of warfare than these guys did. These are like the most experienced veterans in human history. So they mutinied, and these guys were fine with going around and serving their various Macedonian masters in the never-ending century of civil wars that followed. But they didn't want to go. This would have been like the Wehrmacht and the Waffen SS saying, "No, we're not going to Stalingrad. This is stupid." Okay, we'll turn back around and pacify the rest of Europe, but we're not going to Stalingrad and getting ground to pieces. So you had the disease question in India, and they knew that these guys were probably going to die in India, and they knew it. Okay, so they proved themselves, 20 bloodthirsty in the never-ending wars of the Diadochi, which were the successors of Alexander.
Let's just go back real quick. I'm curious why the southern Indian kingdoms, I'm not sure if they were united in one kingdom or not, but like the southern kingdoms, they actually had a really like a strong warrior class. Like, did they have a sense of the heroic there, or?
Yes, and now in southern India, you're talking about in the extreme southern in the Deccan, you're talking about guerrilla warfare. The Mughals never even took that. All right, so from the Macedonian viewpoint, we're just talking about northern India, which is an Aryan kingdom. Right now, the Brahmins in northern India are 70% Aryan. 2,325 years ago, or 28 years ago, these guys were probably 90% Aryan. Okay, so
is that Pakistan, basically?
Yes, these would be very similar to the Pashtuns. They might as well have been fighting the Scythians or the Sarmatians. Okay, they're fighting their own type of people. This is and it's a closer order of combat because you have chariots and elephants. It's an older model, so it's a bloodier battle than fighting the horse armies of the Persians. Even though the Persians were very heroic too, they had their own hero culture. they would fight tigers in hand-to-hand combat. Alexander almost got killed doing that because he wanted to be like the Persian kings. The Persian monarchs were not cowards, except for the last one, Darius II, who repeatedly ran. But so you have these. You think of the modern Sikhs. There's a famous battle. I think there's even an Indian film company has done a miniseries called Sephora 21. The 21 guys that fought to the death at a fortress called Sephora against something like 500 or 600 Afghan tribesmen that invaded India.
Oh, wow.
Okay, and these guys actually, these 20 dudes just stuck it out, and it's one of the most famous last stands in human history. So even with firearms, when you're looking at the Sikhs, now this develops after Alexander because the Sikhism is it's a reactionary Hindu, reactionary branch of Hinduism that's exclusively dealing with the war god to deal with the Muslims. It's a reaction to Islam, the hideous invasion of Islam in India, which was one of the most genocidal actions ever committed, and it lasted for hundreds of years. Now, predating that, the warrior culture that formed the Sikhs, and they're still very militant. I mean, these are the guys that the black dudes in Baltimore, and when the Sikhs are running the liquor store, the black dudes don't mess with them. Okay.
Interesting. Yeah.
So they still have a strong warrior culture. They still teach their martial arts. These guys were waiting for Alexander there, and they bloodied his nose, and it hopped him up for more combat. But his men were on, no, we're never getting out of this place if we follow this guy down in here, because they could see the numbers. They knew about the disease. They're now fighting elephants.
Well,
and they got phalanx. The elephants were no good against the Roman legions, but they were really nasty against the phalanx. Okay, so it was a legit tank in their terms. They adopted this. The armies of Diadachi, like the Carthaginians, universally adopted the war elephant and used it against the Romans, and they didn't have the success with it that they had against the phalanx, the elephant.
Okay, I guess I have two questions. So one would be why did the Roman legionnaire, why could they combat the elephant versus...
It's open order. One centurion just walked up to a war elephant and chopped off its trunk with his gladiator.
Right. Okay?
Yeah. All right. The Romans were swordsmen. They were not pikemen or spearmen. They threw a missile weapon and then they went in with the sword. Okay. So if they got in on you, it was a nightmare, whether you were a soft-nosed elephant. And yeah, you might squash a bunch of them, but then you lose your trunk. Okay. And it was the same thing with the phalanxes. The Romans were terrified of the phalanx. But once the Roman legionnaires got in beyond the spear points, and they got in there with that long cut and thrust sword against the shorter Macedonian sword, it was a slaughter. It was a buzzsaw. And you have the type of wounds done by this hacking sword are much more hideous, particularly at funerals for the fallen, than the cleaner thrust wounds from the pikes and the concussions from the shields. So a battlefield after a bunch of Romans went through it looked a lot nastier than after the phalanx rolled over it. Even though, a phalanx against the legion was a pick 'em fight. The phalanx won a lot of those fights.
Okay. Now, how were the Muslims able to survive, conquer India with the disease and overcoming?
They never conquered all of it. They basically got Pakistan and a little bit of, across the top. the area over to what is now Bangladesh, which used to be East Pakistan, they would go. They went right across from the Indus Valley to Calcutta because they had horse armies. All right, so they were able to dominate the northern plains of India. They were never really able to get much done down in the jungles and the mountains.
Okay.
Yeah, they made their inroads, and there was there was a lot of semi-Islamic kingdoms and principalities where it wasn't just Muslims. You might have a sultan leading it, but he would also have different types of Hindu troops, and the whole Indian thing was so complicated. And it's something I've only read 4 or 5 books on India. One good one, if you want to look at the tail end of what India looks like, is Under the Raj. I forget the guy's name. R.A.J. was the title of the British Empire in India after the East India Company went under in the 1857 Sepoy Rebellion, which was a significant revolution with religious overtones.
Okay.
Which kind of ended the period of quasi-medieval battle in the subcontinent.
Okay. So okay, like maybe we could kind of talk about like just the primordial use of genocide within like human history. I think you mentioned like you kind of like when one tribe conquers another tribe, right? You have like a few options. You can like, eat them, you could enslave them, you could kill them all, or you could like adopt them, or maybe you did a combination of all 4 of those things.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, so I'm just curious what your idea is on like maybe like the overarching use of genocide in human history, or the primordial use, or
Well, most pre-civilized wars are extended, low-intensity, slow-motion attempts at genocide.
Okay.
Where they're trying to. Black Hawk describes how he wanted to kill every single Cherokee. Okay?
Yeah.
Because they were the blood enemies of his Fox and Sax people. Keeley, his name's Keeley or Healy. It's 2 E's, then an L, then an EY. I keep forgetting whether it's Keeley or Healy. He wrote a book titled War Before Civilization. And he's an archaeologist, and or an anthropologist, one or the other of those. And he had a very difficult time even being permitted to study genocides at Iron Age sites and at Stone Age sites, because archaeological doctrine says that there was no genocides until Europeans got gunpowder. It's just stupid.
Yeah.
There was a genocide in the Missouri River Valley, where an entire people was annihilated by another Native American people. I think like around 500 or 600 AD. There is various Iron Age genocides of entire people that looks like they were committed by the hunting people that were the descendants of the Cro-Magnons in Europe. That all the arrowheads are facing inward, and then the entire place is wiped out. And of course, the standard archaeologists say, well, all the arrowheads are by the gate because that's where the old crippled men would make arrowheads and give them to the hunters. Well, no, because these people didn't even use bows and arrows, because they were farmers and they fought in close order battle, and they were attacked by men who primarily used the bow and arrow out of the forest. So the Stone Age and Iron Age genocide is the rule in combat. And when you get up to the time of Daganoweda, who was a prophet, he was an Iroquois prophet. Iroquois means longhouse people, and there were 5 tribes. I think he was I think he was Mohawk. Okay. The Mohawk means man-eater, just like Mohegan means man-eater, and Mohican means man-eater. It also sometimes means wolf, which is kind of the same thing. All right. Now, Daganoweda, he and Hiawatha, I'm of the opinion that there were probably numerous Hiawathas, and that Daganoweda was like the last prophet of the accreted, melding of these different Hiawatha figures into a deity. Okay. Mormons would say the Hiawatha is probably Jesus Christ. Hiawatha means he who makes rivers, and he binds men in concord was added to it. He's the son of Thunderer. Okay. So he's probably a Norse deity. Okay. Thunderer is definitely a Norse deity in the Iroquois tradition, which has 1,700 Norse loanwords and a pretty small vocabulary. It's about the size of Spanish, which is nothing near as extensive as English. The Daganoweda is given responsibility for taking the Mohawks away from being man-eaters. They stopped being man-eaters. Now, the Iroquois Confederacy and Daganoweda were formed at about the time of first contact with the French. This would have been about the time that diseases were introduced, and there was also attacks with firearms and alliances against the Iroquois with some Algonquin tribes. So my theory is what made the Iroquois switch from cannibalism to adoption was probably stress put upon them by introduced European diseases.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
They maintained their numbers. Okay, where, for instance, in the Caribbean there was no maintenance in the numbers. The population crashed under pressure from European diseases. Probably various reasons for it, including a heavy admixture over the millennia of Europeans being shipwrecked or being caught fishing on that shore, trading with those people. But the Iroquois conducted various genocides. They wiped out the Allegheny, which means the beautiful people. Those people were annihilated. The Erie, which means the raccoons, they wiped out the coons. Okay, they totally annihilated them. There were three other tribes they wiped out. There was a reason why there was a tribal vacuum around the Pittsburgh area, which they would have called Three Rivers, by the way. And Daganoweda means three rivers, two rivers coming together to become one. That was a sacred Iroquois spot, even though they didn't really live there. So it's probably where they wiped out at least one tribe of enemies. In fact, Erie, Pennsylvania is not far from Pittsburgh. And it's along the Allegheny River, the beautiful people river. The beautiful people didn't do too well under Iroquois' attention. So genocide is just the norm for tribal warfare. Most in North America, the names of most tribes meant the people, and their names for other tribes meant the enemy.
Right. You said
you
something like the Native Americans viewed people outside their tribe as ghost people.
Okay, so Navajo is Hopi for the enemy. Apache is Navajo for the enemy.
Okay.
Okay, the Navajo would call themselves the Dene, which meant the people.
Right. They have the humanity, and everyone outside is the No, like this kind of like some you hear people like on a Joe Rogan podcast or something, or like they're like, why are there serial killers? And that seems to be an obsession with a lot of TV shows and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems like in tribal societies that are highly militarized, which a lot of tribal societies seem to be, pretty much all the men would be serial killers by our definition. I mean, but they wouldn't be within their own tribe, obviously.
Right.
They would be hyper violent.
Not really by our definition.
Okay.
Okay,
Okay.
the significant warriors would be somebody like Blue Jacket, who took at least 34 scalps. Okay, total serial killer by our definition. To become a full warrior in the tribe, you either have to kill a man and take his scalp, or you have to count coup. You have to do something daring that puts you in as much danger as if you would have killed somebody. Okay, like maybe touching an armed man in combat. So you wouldn't have a whole tribe of you had guys like uh, Geronimo Blackhawk. Blackhawk killed a good 30, 40 guys. Blue Jacket, Chick Six. You'd have different standout tribal figures that would kill prodigious amounts of people. It would be like Lewis Wessel probably killed 30 or 40 people on the white Indian side, the frontiersmen. Dan Boone maybe killed one or two guys in combat. Okay. And Daniel Boone, he was a leader. He would pattern on a more normal man that, hunts a whole lot, killed hundreds, maybe thousands of animals, killed a couple of guys in combat. Okay, that would be your normal tribal combat. Is you've got everybody's been in combat. A good portion of these men, if you've been to war, have killed somebody. But then you have a couple of guys that are the studs. It'd be like Michael Jordan on the basketball team. You're gonna have one guy that's your lead scorer.
Okay.
Okay, that's just super wired for this activity.
Right, and I don't.
It's like a boxing club. How many guys are just going to have like a Mike Tyson or George Foreman knockout ratio? Not many. I mean, you take a typical boxing club. Most guys get knockouts by accident. They maybe have a couple of them. Mostly it's like, wins, losses, and draws by decision. And then you'll have one guy in the gym like Tony Saigon at Loch Raven who he knocks everybody out. Okay. And he's got to take it easy on the other dudes in the gym. I mean, this is a normal tribal situation. Right? Okay. Where you got a couple of guys that would be the equivalent of the modern serial killer. And then the rest of them would just be like a reliably violent guy that would rather not have to kill on a regular basis, okay, for whatever reason. And it might just be because he doesn't want to take that risk. It might just be it's really difficult for him to kill somebody because he's not a superstar and he's got to work really hard at it and get hurt doing it. He's not Blue Jacket. He's not just snuffing dudes like they're not there.
Right. Okay. So yeah, like a combination of you need the athleticism to do it and also like have the psychology to do it too.
Yeah.
And is it pretty common? I mean, I don't know much about modern serial killers, but I one comes to mind is that like I think it's called the Iceman or something, that guy that was a serial killer for the mob, a hitman for the mob.
I saw his interview, Kaczynski, I forget.
Right.
It begins with a K. Well, I'm real suspicious of all the serial killer lore, and I am of the opinion that the people that were not killed by federal agencies that are on the lists were just unsolved murders that they pinned on one guy that maybe killed a couple of people.
Okay.
I'm just really, the serial killer thing has become such a celebrity cult. I really think it's like a federal op, and it's largely propaganda, and it's also it's really interesting how they structured the categorization of a serial killer so that some homeboy that kills 3 people with a 9mm at a party can't be a serial killer, or I mean, there's probably like 100 guys in Baltimore that are actually active serial killers. They've killed more than 3 people, and every couple of years they kill somebody. I mean, but the whole serial killer mythology, I think it's mostly bullshit. I'm sure there's a couple of these guys, okay, and you can pick them out in ancient and early modern times. Guys like Lewis Wetzel, Okay, possibly Liver Eaton Johnson, Blue Jacket, Black Hawk, Geronimo. You can pick these people out. Okay, but now the idea that there's some 35-year-old white guy in the shadows, that's like stacking bodies up in a basement, like in every state. I think
Yeah.
this is, I think this is like, so I think this is part of the same operation that has convinced most Americans that that a carbine or rifle that is made in the style of a military battle rifle actually has telepathic ability to colonize human minds and make them go kill people.
Right.
So, so yeah, it's not even something I'm really interested in discussing because I think it's mostly bullshit, and I don't have the time to even sort it out because it's not really important to me. But you can definitely look at, Achilles was a serial killer, Odysseus was a serial killer, and a rapist. I mean, he raped a couple of goddesses. Gilgamesh, serial killer, rapist. So ancient heroes, Heracles, these types of people, and to get out of the earlier mythological heroes when you look at people like Polydamas, Astyanax, who were documented historical athletes who killed numerous people. Aptus of Alexandria is a gladiator, like at least 37 dudes in the arena. Miyamoto Musashi, these guys are in the historical record, but in a tribal setting, they're extremely special. Just like most gladiators just get killed in their first match.
Right.
There's just a handful of these guys to get up there. Okay. I have to take speaking of ancient history, I have to take an ancient bladder break. I will be right back. Okay.
No problem. We are going to listen to some more Conan.
Snap your W2.
Wait for that to be over.
Away from the Peloponnesian War, you had started out when we were off earlier. You said you wanted to discuss something about heroism. So there's a place where it fits in. We touched on some of the mythic heroes. In the Peloponnesian War, the Aeginetans are annihilated. This was a major city-state. They were unfortunate neighbors of Athens. The Delians were annihilated. Alexander genocided the Thebans. This was like the third largest city-state in Greece. Now, there's a little town. It begins with a TH, and I forget the full name of it. Every generation of their men, and 3 generations were wiped out in these different wars. In the First Persian War, the Second Persian War, and then in the Peloponnesian War. So genocide is a real thing. The Romans conducted numerous genocides, and they would compound it or complete it by annihilating the culture. They brought in a monoculture. Now, when you see these ideological revolutions, like you did in the Peloponnesian War, you'll see the extinguishing of peoples. There will be genocides, and there will also be the death of heroes and the rise of demagogues. Okay, so Brasius, according to his enemy, was about the best man in Greece. Okay, his enemy was Thucydides that wrote about him. He eventually dies. He's got to fight at close quarters so often, so many of these little potential genocide conflicts with these little communities. He eventually dies in battle. In the end, Brasius is replaced by a brutal Spartan king who commits atrocities. And men like Thucydides that respect their opponents are replaced by demagogues like Alcibiades, who actually talks most of the men in Athens to vote for a war for plunder over in Sicily, and most of these guys die over there. It was one of the biggest military disasters in human history. As when you look at the men lost in Sicily by the Athenians as a percentage of their free population. So towards the end of this conflict, you get Soviet-style leaders in the Russian or in the Spartan camp, and this is why your traditional historians would use it, because in the end, the Spartans started to behave like Soviet leaders in like a Warsaw Pact country. Okay, so but this is just a process of the heroes getting weeded out by this long extended ideological conflict in which people don't want to submit, and they're attempting genocide, and then they're being replaced by brutal political functionaries that know how to ladder climb internally. And on the Democratic side, they're being replaced by popularity hounds, guys with a high charisma who know how to talk people into behaving against their own self-interest. So and again, these types of situations are when you see the breakdown of hygiene and supply chains in a society like this and the stress of war, then diseases prop up. But the disease thing's for another discussion.
Okay. That's really interesting. Do you?
It takes you to Plutarchy. Okay, so what you end up with is democracy versus oligarchy in the Peloponnesian War. What you really ended up with was the last man standing is a weird monarchy. It's a unique government supported by a third player, the Persians. And they turn on the Persians, by the way. The Spartans ended up turning on the Persians. The people that end up running both a democracy and the oligarchies are the guys behind the scenes. We would call them the Plutarchs. Okay, so it really, when you have this ideological conflict in these collective governing bodies, like you had in ancient Greece, then what you end up with is ruled by conspiracy. And this is why sometimes tyrants were seen as temporary saviors, because they could, get rid of the conspirators for a while, at least kill some of these bad actors. But it's very easy to politically overthrow a tyrant and then paint him to be a bad guy retrospectively. In fact, certain fascist leaders could be seen in the 20th century to have been the analog of the ancient Greek tyrant that was often seen as somebody that was saving the regular guy from the fanaticism of the Democrats and the conspiracies of the oligarchs. So ultimately, the Plutarch, the guy behind the scenes and that running things, the guy that has the money strings.
Right. It's interesting you bring that example of the tyrant kind of like being a temporary solution. It's like
he's easily disposed of, and then he's easily disparaged in the rear view.
Thomas Aquinas, I believe on his book like On Kings, he's advocating for like the benefits of monarchy, and he talks about how like a monarchy can fix the wrongs of an oligarchy if the oligarchy like takes over and stuff. Like having an institutionalized monarchy can combat the oligarchy.
Edward Gibbon makes a good case for this.
Okay.
I think the 5th chapter of his Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. And he starts out with, I think I mentioned this before, mentioning that it's pretty hard for the advocate of the monarchy not to blush when he advocates it, because it's such a childish form of government on the face of it. But then he makes the case why it's very often better than the alternatives.
Yeah, I'm personally a monarchist, though I don't know which one is the best form of monarchy or anything like that. But it does seem to be the lesser of evils out of the options. But yeah, um, it's kind of interesting. I find this a lot with the boomers in America, because it seems like we place so much faith on the presidency, and to me that just seems like that's a natural inclination for the average person to want a monarch, want a
The
King
pres-
Arthur. And but
yeah.
we're Americans, and we're supposed to be all about, like, democracy, and we don't like kings, and especially with the boomers, but the boomers, a lot of my uh conservative family members that are boomers, they put a lot of faith in the Orange Man, and it all came to nothing. I mean, he couldn't even stop the COVID lockdowns or secure the borders, I mean, I personally think he's a cuck. I mean, I personally think that if Trump had any real balls, he would have become a bloodthirsty, violent tyrant. But I don't think he has any balls to do that. He probably would have got shot if he did that, but he might have like at least a 50-50 a chance of restoring some order in this country if he went on a genocidal rampage. But obviously he didn't do that.
Well, that's how he's viewed. If you look at CNN, that's how he's viewed. I watch that network sometimes. But George Washington, his soldiers wanted him to be king.
Right.
Okay, now he made a deal with the Continental Congress, his backers, that they'd let him lose battle after battle. As long as he kept an army in the field, they knew they were playing the long game. And they didn't have to worry about constantly looking for instance, Benedict Arnold was such a better leader than Washington, it wasn't even funny, okay? He was really screwed over, including by Washington. And the problem with somebody like Benedict Arnold was he was ideologically motivated. He really believed in the idea of the Republic. The guys that were the signatories to the signers of the Constitution, they were just using it as a front for, maintaining their oligarchy. That's all it was. And Washington, as president, he had pre-rehearsed a speech about why he would not accept kingship. Okay, so this was a work. They knew going in that the men were going to want protection against the rich man. The fighting man was going to want protection against the rich man when the war was over, because they ultimately knew, that was what that they were just fighting to exchange one master for another. Only 1/3 of Americans wanted to break away. 1/3 did not give a shit, and the other third wanted to stay with the crown. But the people that wanted to break away were predominantly the upper class, okay, because it was basically the guys at the point of production taking over the cartel operation. Okay, so they, because they were sitting right on the supply, and they knew they could develop their own industrial base. So, the president is the counterfeit king. He is, and he's called the commander in chief. He's given temporary king powers in periods of crisis, and he's really, what the psychology of the working guy leans on. It was the whole idea behind the whole Robin Hood legend was all about the natural alliance of the poor guy with the king.
Yeah.
So it goes way back in Anglo history, and almost as soon as the Robin Hood legend comes up, there's the signing of the Magna Carta, which is where the king even throws the rich guys under the bus to the moneylenders.
I won't even say their names.
Right. Well, it was them and others. It says in the Magna Carta,
sure,
and others, so it wasn't just the usual suspects. It includes the Templars and the Lombards. The Lombards were, when they revolted against Charlemagne, they were defrocked from the warrior class, and they were reduced to moneylender status.
Right.
Okay, so you had the Lombards, you had the Templars, and then you had Old Testament people. So these are the people that get control of the government from behind the scenes by about 100 AD. And it's just built into the money system, just the way money works. It divorces morality from buying power.
Right. Going to the Robin Hood thing, it would be interesting if we did like a for future episodes, we could like go over all the different myths and legends from the Norse to Gilgamesh to Anglo-Saxon, all of it, and even some of the modern myths like Tolkien, which is kind of interesting and stuff. I actually have not read all of the Lord of the Rings, but I mean I understand the general plot and stuff.
I read it twice when I was a kid. I read The Hobbit twice, and I enjoy the movies. Yeah, I'd be willing to discuss that. So the revolution and genocide, according to Edward Gibbon, this is very interesting. In his 9th chapter and 10th chapter, he discusses the German peoples. In his opinion, of course, this guy is writing in the mid-1700s to late 1700s. In his opinion, Odin, or Woden, was the Muhammad of the Norse. He described Odin as a Germanic chieftain who took his people away from the world of the Middle Sea and the Euxine, the Black Sea, away from the Ukraine area and other grasslands of Central and Eastern Europe, like the Hungarian plain, and moved them to Scandinavia. And he did this to preserve them, to keep them from being genocided, and to keep their culture from being corrupted. And that he developed, in his view, Nordic theology was an ideology, a metaphysical ideology constructed by this one prophet, Odin, who took his own eye, as a way to inoculate his people against the poison of civilization and becoming corrupted. And at the end, he actually hung himself and killed himself as a sacrifice for his people, wow, so that his people would remember him and, of course, deify him. Paul Anderson writes about this in War of the Gods, which is probably the best historical and mythological novel and one that I've read. Paul Anderson, Poul, War of the Gods. And he also conflates that with a metaphysical Odin, too, in his account. But this is a very interesting case that that Gibbon makes. And in his 10th chapter, he relates how the Goths came to the Black Sea and behaved exactly like the Vikings of a later age did in the Atlantic and the Baltic.
Wow.
It's kind of like fighters against and pillagers of civilization from outside of civilization, taking what you want from civilization, but not building a city, not letting it poison you, not letting it weaken you. And Gibbon does point out how barbarism does offer freedom, which civilization does not offer, because civilization is, according to Gibbon, and this is the man who was an advocate for the civilized British monarchy that was built on forced labor, he does point out that for all the nice things of civilization and the ability of a learned man such as himself to discuss deep concepts, that it has to be built on a model of forced habitation, limited social and geographic mobility, and forced service in and out of the military.
Yeah. Well, that kind of brings us into Conan, right? I've listened to a lot of your talks on Conan, and Howard, I believe, is the author. Civilization versus barbarism. Very, very interesting topic. Yeah.
Well, he had. I wrote a book with that title that was inspired by uh, some of the letters I read going back and forth between him and H.P. Lovecraft about where Lovecraft advocated for civilization and Howard advocated for barbarism. And they had this debate going back and forth in letters. I did not read the complete series of it. It's out there for people who are interested in it. I just I looked at a combination of the historical record and modern social examples of feral barbarism, and really looking for. And Gibbon, I actually found myself in agreement with Gibbon. Gibbon points out that some good things like honor and heroism. This comes from barbarism. This doesn't come from civilization. Civilization compromises some of these good things. So that's why he thinks class stratification and the maintenance of warrior aristocracy and an academy is important for maintaining some of the good barbaric things that you don't want to just get trampled under what ultimately becomes money-grubbing civilization.
Right. Now, how would you do you think the Celtic civilization, the Celtic cultures, were they barbarians or a mixture of civilization and barbarians, or
Paul Cartledge would call them a civilization. And I think archaeologists have tilted more and more towards the Celts, the Gauls, the Gallic people, the Galatians, the Galatians, that this band of people were an alternative civilization that the Romans exterminated, largely, and that they were for instance, they engaged in a lot of agriculture, metalworking. They were much more advanced in construction, fixed habitation, artifact making, and apparently had a written language where the Germans did not. So Gibbon makes the case that the Germans were actually rebels against civilization. Under Odin, they actually dedicated themselves to a life of barbarism outside of civilization, and there was a fixed line between the Celts and the Germans, and I guess somebody of Gibbon's time would have probably called the Celts semi-civilized, but it was a civilization as far as I was concerned. They did monolithic builds. They had large towns. Their Romans had to siege Alicia. The Romans built a wall around it, and then they built a wall around their wall because the Romans that were besieging Alicia were attacked by a huge army of Gauls. So these people were coming to defend the city. So the Gauls were a civilization. The Romans wiped them out. But when you're talking about the Romans and Greeks, they would, our idea of barbarian being uncivilized, barbarian to them more had to do with their culture and their language.
Okay.
So a lot of people that were called barbarians by the Romans and the Greeks, they didn't mean it the way that they were uncivilized. They meant it that they were Asiatic, or they didn't have hot baths, or they didn't have agons, or something like that. It referred to a lack of very specific cultural practices.
Okay.
The term barbarian. It just meant outsider, the people who speak the wrong language. But the Germanic people, and also the Dacians, were a civilization. and I think they were a brand of Celt or Gael. I might be wrong. The Germans of the ancient Greek and Roman period fit the classic definition of barbarian that we're used to, and as Gibbon would say, almost a savage.
It does seem ironic that DNA structure, that was so they were the barbarians of the ancient world, but then later on, I mean, in modern day, they are extremely civilized, right? That just, yeah, which can happen to anyone, but it does seem ironic.
It's suggestive of Gibbon's point that Germanic barbarism was a revolt against a civilization.
Okay.
I couldn't call it a confirmation, but it does suggest his case.
Yeah. You said you have to leave at 3:30, correct?
Yes. Oh, and we did. We can't finish. We can't finish the discussion on genocide without hitting upon some, modern genocides. There's a whole bunch of them in the Pacific. There's a set of islands about 1,000 miles west of New Zealand that had about 4,000 inhabitants. They got wiped out. There was, I think it's the island of the Mother of God, Espiritu something, Dos Santos, in the Pacific. I think it's in the Marquis Islands. Some Spanish bitch had her white brothers conduct a crusade on this island and kill every last Aborigine on there. I'd like to include the dodo bird, but I don't think it makes the cut. But the Timucuan Indians in Florida, that was a complete genocide, and we pretty much know when the last 20 of them were around. The Tasmanians, that they just hunted them like dogs to extinction. There's some mixed blood out there. There's some Tasmanian blood left. And of course the banana farmers in Rwanda. I think they killed like 800,000 people in like 8 weeks or something. It's pretty incredible with machetes.
Yeah.
There's a book called Machete Season. A guy interviewed a bunch of the perps, actually did it, and they actually sit around and talk to him about how they killed all these people. And they mainly did it for sheet metal and beef.
I see.
It's like tweakers with machetes, just like murdering you for copper and mass. I mean, these banana farmers were doing it for sheet metal and beef.
Wow. So there's also like I guess you could say that the depending on who you talk to, the Irish like genocide / like starvation. You could say genocide through starvation, right?
Well, and the ones that fought got killed and dumped in mass graves. So that's
right.
From mid 1500s to about 1700. 2/3 of the Irish population was exterminated, and then it happened again in the 1840s.
Okay. Oh, right. You're talking about like the Cromwell invasion, right? And then.
Oh yeah, it was going before Cromwell. Queen Elizabeth, that cunt had some savage Englishmen over there annihilating the mix.
Right.
Including the guy named Lane, who ended up picking a fight with a Native American tribe in Roanoke.
Okay. Is there anything you want to say about Mongol genocide? Anything interesting?
Nobody did a better job. Yeah, that was their policy. It was genocide as an example of what happens if you don't surrender. So the Mongols used it as a policy instrument, and it was effective. A lot of people surrendered because they want to wipe out, and they actually conducted a successful genocide of the Hashishans. who had over 200 forts in the Middle East, mostly in what would now be Iran. And they knocked down every fort, and the grandfather of the Hashishins, they gave him to a bunch of Armenians, because he had crucified like 10,000 Armenian women and children.
Oh, wow.
They were Christians, so the Mongols thought he was such a bad guy, they gave him to the Armenians. So the Armenians cut pieces off of him, and they cooked him on a brazier, and then they force-fed him to him, so he had to eat himself to death.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah, so, yeah, the Mongols probably killed more people than anybody.
Wow.
And, you know, they were big believers in genocide. I mean, it solves the problem. You know.
Right. Final solution.
I mean, the way to do it in the modern world would just be to use barbed wire and turn off the water, and everybody's dead in 3 days.
Exactly. Yeah. Do you think we're gonna I mean, of course we're gonna see genocide in the future as like part of human nature, but do you have any guesses where we might see the next genocide in the modern world?
Oh, well, Africa.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, some whole group of people is going to get whacked over there. And there's hardly any capoids and pygmies left. I mean, and they're like subspecies in human race. So they both have very small numbers right now.
Okay.
Now, there was during the time when Herodotus was writing, there were hardly any blacks in North Africa.
Oh, wow.
And even the people that lived in the Sahara were described very much as looking like what we would think of as the sand bushmen. And in fact, the Ethiopian troops didn't even have metal weapons. They had antler-tipped spears. And he was writing 450 BC. It wasn't until 500 AD, I believe, that Malaysians introduced the yam and iron to Madagascar and Southeast Africa. Until that point, you know, what we think of as Africans, the Bantus, just occupied the eastern East Africa in the jungle zone up to Ethiopia. And most of the continent was dominated by the Bushmen with their little poison arrows and rawhide bows and arrows. They pretty much terrorized the Bigs, and they're racially completely different. They have the women have an extra labial fold on their vagina. They have entire additional fat chambers on their rear end. They have like a really squared butt that you could like sit a baby on and change its diapers. And they're called capoids because they have a type of hair that is distinct from Bantu hair, Asian round hair, and then flat Caucasian hair. They have this, and I forget how it's different, but it's a fourth type of hair. You know, people think there's only 3 kinds of hair out there, human hair out there, but it's really the fourth, and these people have it, and they're named for that capoid hair structure. So from about 500 AD, so you want to talk about genocide, from about 500 AD to 1700, when the Dutch are wiping out capoid Xhosa people, Hottentots, they call them Hottentots. The Dutch are wiping out Hottentots, and then they run into Zulus who are wiping out Hottentots who are coming south. So the actual Europeans antedate black Africans in South Africa. Europeans were there first, okay, in the southern tip of Africa. And they annihilated these copper-skinned folk, and then they ran into black people that were coming south who were annihilating copper-skinned folk. Because once they got their population base up through yam cultivation and they had iron weapons, they were able to take casualties against these little bowmen and then go after them in hand-to-hand combat and bring them to battle. And they hunted them to extinction, virtually extinction. There's only a couple of thousand of these people left today. And they used to populate 80% of the continent of Africa through most of recorded history and virtually all of prehistory.
Interesting.
So, so little Asians bringing over the yam and iron actually, they did more to expand that black African population than any group in history. A close second would be English people, would be a close second to expanding African habitation and population, would be the English, the British. But the ones that really started it were the Malaysians. They were the first benefactors of black folk.
Interesting.
On a huge demographic level.
Well, I know that the Chinese are in Africa now quite a bit, so I wonder what the next version of this will be.
So it's an interesting story, and a good map of it is in Joseph Campbell's World Atlas of Mythology, in Volume 1 of The Way of the Animal Powers. It was an excellent map of this. A prehistoric racial map of the world is very interesting, and it conforms to what is in Herodotus.
Well, I would love to discuss, your ideas of the pre-modern, notions of race and the Aryan invasion of Europe and just.
Sure, we can do that as an episode. That would be great, and the hero thing will come up there too. It's something that you can put into. We can have the heroic angle on most historical discussions you're going to want to do. It's a pretty easy one.
Okay. Would you say all the races at some point have a sense of the heroic? Like the sense of the heroic is mostly cultural, not racial?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Now, in some racial groups, the hero is a trickster.
I see.
In most Asiatic racial groups, to include Punic people, to include Near Easterners, Caucasians that speak Punic languages, the idea of hero is usually simply champion, our guy that we send out to fight their best guy. Okay. The thing that is unique about the Aryan hero is he has a tendency to not only be the champion of the people, but to go against the gods and to go against the secular powers. Okay, so he's more likely to appeal to working class people or warrior class people. Now, the trickster hero is going to appeal to the working class person more than the battle hero. So Odysseus is going to appeal more to a modern hobo than Achilles, right? And what's really interesting is this whole trickster complex of the hero. It's circumpolar. It wraps around the northern hemisphere, and it's very prominent in North America.
Okay.
Okay, so maybe it just has something to do with the climate.
Sure.
Right?
Okay.
I don't know, but that it's one of the more interesting, one of the more unique things about the Aryan hero is one, he tends not to just be a trickster. He's more likely to be just a brute than a trickster, but even so, he will stubbornly go against the powers and be punished by the gods.
Okay.
Okay, so this is, and Samson is an example of where this type of Aryan hero comes into the Punic realm, and the Dan tribe, according to two Israeli scholars who wrote a book in '72 on the Sea Peoples, the Danic tribe, okay, were the same as the Dan tribe, which is Samson's tribe, were the same tribe that the Egyptians called the Denians, and that were the tribe of the Danites in the siege of Troy. Okay, so they were a Hellenic tribe that gets adopted into the Israel.
Oh, interesting.
And he has a much more so David's more of a classic hero. Okay, where he's our guy, he's a champion, he's going to do what it takes to win. Okay, even if it's using a sling like a coward against a giant instead of going out there and cutting him down. Okay, so that's a classic universal hero where he's just a champion. He's the big man. He's the tough guy. He's the head gangster. Okay, where Samson's the guy that goes against the whole system to include the metaphysical system.
Now, like, why do you think that's? What does that like say about like the Aryan psyche, or like the?
I think it takes us back to Edward Gibbon's point that Odin or his prophet developed a religion that was designed to break away from civilization, okay, and isolate from civilization. The Aryans come into being, come onto the world historical stage as chariot and war cart operators. It's necessary to have contact with civilization to develop the composite bow and chariot systems that these people used. Okay, it wasn't just something that some savages come up with out in the middle of nowhere. They need contact with civilization, but they have an ethos that is about pillaging civilization and staying outside of it, like the Sarmatians and the Scythians did for thousands of years, and like the Germans did for thousands of years. And then when they fall victim to the temptation of wanting to conquer a piece of the civilization for themselves, eventually that civilization corrupts them and weakens them, and they become part of it, and they become like a cautionary tale. And there's a lot of this in Ovid's poem Metamorphoses. There's a lot of examples of heroes that become corrupted once they settle down, and they're even poisoned by the dragon that they slay. The ground is poisoned by the dragon. The hero is poisoned by the dragon. Hercules is ultimately poisoned by the venom of the dragon, the Hydra, that he slays. Okay, so these eagle-inspired warriors that tend to use eagles, Zeus is the god of the eagle. You look at all these flags of all these Aryan nations across the world, there's eagles, and they're very often holding a serpent. This is eagle domination over the serpent. This is the men from the steppes, the big sky country, coming in and conquering the decadent civilization and dominating this Earth Mother-based snake cult civilization, and eventually aspects of this civilization, and Medusa is an example of this. They can corrupt and even turn to stone. There are many in Ovid's Metamorphoses. There's many examples of nereids and dryads and nymphs being turned to stone, and heroes being turned to stone by contact with dragons, serpents, and older evils that were already there. And there's also the conflation of this with the Titans. Was these ideas of the Titans, these elder gods, could this have really been some prehistoric civilization we don't have a record of?
Okay. Kind of making an analogy here, or just a comparison between this fight against civilization. Like I was watching what is it? This Eastern European, basically bare knuckle MMA, or you could say bare knuckle, like, or just pancration. They even allow like eye gouging.
Mm-hmm.
And like, so it seems to be like this reemergence you're gonna see. I've been seeing in like Eastern Europe of a fight, at least in the combat arts, like a rejection of civilized rules.
The revolt against the modern world, where you see it, it's in the northern zone on both continents.
Okay.
And you can see it in spots in the United States. Again, I was involved with one of these groups, Modern Agonistics, where we're trying to recreate gladiatorial combat. We're having unsanctioned boxing matches and stick fights, and this is, the seed is there. Is it racial? Maybe. Is it climatic? I think maybe both. Are there seeds in the culture and the language? Maybe there are, and maybe this is why the modern world, the media world is constantly waging a semantic war, changing definitions. Because maybe it's embedded in the language. This default, this rejection, the biker lifestyle is an aspect of this reduction of civilization, which is also dependent upon civilization.
Right, the motorcycles
has been dragged back into symbiosis with it and even served it. The tweaker subculture is rejection of civilization. So it's ongoing in the northern latitudes, and I'm thinking it's a combination of the culture, the blood, and the latitude, because it does not exist down under. Down in under is completely cucked out. And these were the guys that were sent to Australia and New Zealand and New Ireland rather than be executed, because the Brits considered them beyond help. They could not be civilized. And they sent them down there to that penal colony, and look what's happened at the bottom of the world. I mean, nobody went for the lockdown and gun disarmament and so on more than the most genetically masculine guys from the British Isles.
The Australians.
Okay. Yeah. And they even had like these cool Mario warriors to get together and play rugby with to keep their testosterone level up. And even then, culturally, they cuck out even worse than the United States. So I think and looking at the similarities in Nordic and Amerindian culture, okay, pre-contact, I think there's something to be said that there's latitude bands of culture that are heavily influenced by climate that are circular.
Well, okay. I mean, yeah, I completely agree.
Just like Appalachian culture is littoral. It goes on this diagonal south to north, littoral, where the guy in northwestern Georgia has got as much in common with a dude from the Adirondacks as he does from somebody down in Charleston or Savannah.
Okay. I definitely agree with you. The climate plays a huge role, because like take China, for example. I mean, northern Chinese people are much more like, the men are much more masculine. They're taller. They have deep voices. Oh, yeah. Right. Yeah. I mean, the Japanese too. I mean, right. And then the women are definitely, they have like more feminine voices. And then you go to the south of China, people are shorter and they're more obsessed with money. I mean, everyone is obsessed with money in
And
China,
if
but
you look at, you talk to guys that served in Vietnam. I know a guy that served with the Tiger Brigade. They were ROK, Republic of Korea. The Vietnamese were terrified of the Koreans. I mean, the United States largely brought the Koreans down there into Vietnam to help out as punishment for the Vietnamese continuing to fight because they were, the Vietnamese were just terrified of the Koreans.
Have you seen?
Yeah, I mean, it's like bringing Norwegian guys down into Spain to beat up people. It's just not nice.
Well, have you seen the rooftop YouTube videos of the Koreans during the
Yeah,
riots?
yeah, they were targeted by the government, and they got the short end of that. Little Korea got wiped out. The cops came along and they disarmed everybody except for the store owners.
Yeah,
But yeah, I knew Koreans back east. The Koreans were the guys that took over all the Jewish businesses when the Jewish people lost the stomach for the Bantus. Okay, and now it's the Pakistanis and the Sikhs that have bought the Koreans out because the Koreans lost the stomach for it after 2015.
Okay.
I mean, a friend of mine and I actually acted as a bodyguard a couple times for Incheon, a Korean liquor store owner who closed down in the 2015 riots. He went out of business.
I see.
We stayed there while he closed, make sure that Tyrone and Jamal didn't get him.
Right.
And he asked us. We were there when we saw all the cops in Northeast Baltimore go down to where the riots were being staged. And he looked at us. He said, "I have to close. Can you guys stay?" It's like, yeah, we'll stick around. Because we also saw a bunch of Bantus with gas cans and baseball bats and grill lighters walking around too.
Shit.
Cops blew right by them. They didn't care. They didn't talk to them. They were on the same team.
Yeah.
So anyhow, and that's a form of culture side there. It's really a form of genocide. My entire family has been wiped out of Baltimore City. Now, only a couple of them died. Okay, only a couple of them got raped. Only a couple of them got beaten. But we're all gone, every one of us. And that was a family. Parts of my family were in the Baltimore area in the 1600s.
Wow.
Okay. All right, so 300 years in my lifetime, we all got pushed out. That's a loss of a homeland. That's the start of the Aeneid. That's the end of the Trojans and the beginning of the Romans. That's not the same people anymore because they lost their homeland.
I remember you writing that you have you think you have like a genetic or intergenerational map of Baltimore.
Oh yeah, I can feel it. Yeah, I know. I'm weird and like that, but yeah, I feel my way around Baltimore. I've always felt comfortable walking somewhere without directions, not even knowing what way this. I would use the hills. The hills are kind of hard to navigate because sometimes the streets are going cross purposes. But yeah, I've found my way across most of Baltimore just by feel without having never had a map of Baltimore. And there's a limited advantages. There's a couple of high spots where you can see stuff.
Do you think that's why you stayed for so long?
No, I was. Well, I stayed for so long partially because it was my primary writing material. About the only reason why people were reading me was the Harm City stuff.
Okay.
Plus, I was stubborn. Plus, I had some pretty reliable female companionship there that I didn't want to leave. Okay. So there's a whole bunch of reasons why I stuck around there, and then it got to the point where I'm the last member of my family. there, and I know this is a clear defeat. My entire line has been driven out of its ancestral space when I left.
Right.
So that doesn't feel good. It still feels good.
Yeah. Well, you could say, I mean, I don't know if this will cheer you up, but I mean, it's like the very first Aryans, I think I learned this from you, right? They conquered Europe because they were being kicked out of their ancestral homeland.
Well, probably by weather. It seems like it was a weather pump. Like the high steppes would become uninhabitable under certain near ice age or little ice age conditions, and then they would move for that reason. And then in the final analysis, they finally get driven out by the Mongols. The Mongols finally, that's the group of people that, just like the Japs got better at building cars than Americans, eventually the Mongols got better at horse technology than the Aryans.
Okay.
Of course, they copied it. It was originally an Aryan technology. But the Mongols actually took it to another level. They did the perfect copy and, streamline, improve production.
Right. We eventually kicked the Mongols out, though, right? Like the Aryans kicked them out, and
with the help of gunpowder and railroads.
Okay.
Yeah, it took hundreds of years. They took all of Russia in a generation, and it took half a millennia to get it back.
Okay.
So that's not exactly you knocked me out, so I knock you out in a rematch. No, that's like you knocked me the hell out, and then I win this grinding 50-round decision in the rematch. Because I'm now bigger than you, and I got a bionic arm, and I'm wearing a helmet. So.
Right. Yeah, well, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about this no rules bare knuckle pancration I've been seeing in Eastern Europe. Like, there's some conclusions I made. I don't know. I want to see if you agree or disagree. But okay. So there are absolutely no bloody rules in this. You're even allowed to eye gouge. I've seen it, and I don't know.
Do they allow small joint manipulation? Can you break fingers?
Well, I think you can, but their hands are wrapped, so I haven't seen any of that. Okay. And I thought of that because I remember you mentioning that one famous pancration guy. He would always win by breaking the fingers.
Yeah, Mr. Fingertips. So Stratus of Sicyon. So pancranium means all power thing, and the only rules were no gouging and biting in ancient Greece. But the Spartans permitted even that. So it sounds like you got Spartan pancranium up in Ruskieville.
The Russians, right? So they're wearing mouthpieces and they're wearing heavy hand wraps.
Oh, so there's no biting. That's good.
Right. That's okay. So it seems like most of these fights are dominated by dirty boxing. We would call it like dirty boxing with the elbows, the hammer strikes, the headbutting. It's like Lithway. And and then you have basically some wrestling, some wrestling, but not a lot of submissions. I think the 4 submissions I've seen, 3 of them were like eye gouging, and one was a very sloppy rear naked choke. Now, I'm curious. Is this? Well, can I just finish this one last thing? This is coming to my question to you. This is my question. Okay, is this because these guys are just street fighters and they don't know a lot of submissions, which I kind of doubt because these are Eastern Europeans, which they do a lot of wrestling and combat sambo in their youth communities and things like that. A lot of that's free. So I'm just wondering, Or is it because of a lack of skill? Or is this because when you get rid of all the bullshit, a lot of these submissions don't really work when someone's like headbutting you, or the easiest submission is just to go for the eyes, and punching is like the best way to knock someone out, not really trying to do the high kicks. Do you get, like, is it kind of just like when you get rid of the rules, you burn away all the bullshit and you get to basically it's just dirty boxing and transitional wrestling to get to a dominant position to throw more strikes? That's my question.
Okay, there's an ancient wrestler that won, I think, 2 Olympics by breaking fingers and hands. And this ancient wrestling was just judo throws, naked judo.
Okay.
And he would just grab guys and break their hands and make them quit. Okay. And then, of course, there's one of the most savage pancratius ever. He was just famous. You couldn't submit him because he'd break your fingers. Well, look, if you're Kurt Angle and you get a hold of me, I can't break your finger because your finger is probably stronger than my whole hand. Okay. Yeah. But if you're Kurt Angle and you get a hold of a wrestler that's the next level lower than you, you're both gorilla strong. You get a hold of Mark Coleman can grab your thumb and break it. Okay? So now a lot of the fancy submissions, you're going to have to do submissions that do not give him play of hands on your hands. And I'm sure the arc is just starting on this because I haven't even seen one of these yet.
I'll send them to you.
Somebody's going to figure out how to get submissions when the hands become a target. Okay? In stick fighting, most guys that start out stick fighting, they can't make their eskrima work because they haven't been smacked in the hand before. But then eventually you learn how to defeat the hand attack. You learn how to deal with your hand being a target and target his hand and use that to target his core. Okay, so the same thing is going to happen with the grappling. Eventually you'll get that, but you're not just going to be able to give the guy your hands and understand that he's not going to be allowed. When I've been at MMA events, one of the first things they still tell you during the rules meeting is no small joint manipulation. It's just like the guy will look at you, the referee is usually a teaching grappling instructor who'll look at you. I don't have to say any no small joint manipulations, right? Everybody knows that. At this point, he really doesn't even have to say it because it's just like internalized because nobody does it. Well, that means if nobody does it, they don't even practice it, okay? And they don't practice defending against it. Now, you'll start seeing more submissions down the line once guys get practice defending against small joint manipulation. And then they'll work out how to get a submission when the other guy can break your finger.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's evolution. It's going to happen.
Right. Okay. And I'll send you it's called King of the Streets. I'll send you the one where he gets eye gouged because I know you kind of like that stuff, like the history aspect.
Yeah, and what we would do, I mean, there might still be some videos out there of Damien Kessel and I fighting.
Okay.
I always knew I was going to lose a stick fight when I knocked his stick out of his hand. He was like number 3 Naga no gi on the East Coast. And I was like the worst wrestler on the junior high school team for 2 years. Okay, so I had, once he lost the stick, all he's got to do is a wedge guard over his head.
Okay.
Take one stick hit, and then he's in. He's on me. So there's one video surviving where he takes me down, and the guys are watching this, and we're fighting over a helmet. It's like football with a stick. And I'm shrimping around on the floor, and he's working on getting me in an arm bar, which is usually what he does to me. And I try to grab his thumb, and I can't. And he defeats my attempt to try to grab his thumb because we don't want to break each other's fingers. We do enough of that with a stick. But we know that, like, I'm the striker in this. If I can get my hand wrapped around a digit, he'll call himself out because he knows, same weight class, I could break his finger when I get a hold of it with my hand. He wouldn't let me get that. But then when he was guarding against hand play, I reached up inside of his face cage and I put my fingertips against his eyelids.
Okay.
And I said, did I get it? He said, yeah, you got it. And he tapped himself out because I would have gotten a double eye gouge on. I would have raked both of his eyeballs with my fingernails.
Okay.
Okay, and that's game over. Okay, I mean, Bones Jones can't handle that. Okay, he's tapping on that. He's asking a referee for help. Okay, so we always made sure that we put that in there. That when the guy is taking you down in a weapon fight, if you can get his face cage off and then like cover his eyes, that's an eye gouge.
That's smart. I like
Okay.
that.
Yeah, so he found other ways of submitting me, right? Yeah, so I didn't get that on him again. Every other time he took me down, it was something else, head crank.
Well,
Instead of taking me down, he started throwing me. you know, so I'm like, oh yeah, there's my feet over the back of his head. This can't be good. I must not be on the ground anymore. Boom, and he's on me. So it evolves.
okay. Okay. Yeah.
But as soon as it becomes a sport that's run by an organization, then the evolution all goes to gaming the system and cutting weight and using drugs and this kind of stuff. It goes away from like what would really happen if there were no rules immediately. That's how MMA started to try to answer that question, but it never honestly tried to answer that question because it was always about making money for jujitsu instruction. Yeah, that's what it was about. I mean, it was started as a promotion by the Gracie clan. It was the most brilliant bit of promotion ever done. These guys have all gotten rich teaching jujitsu, and a whole group of scumbags has gotten rich, making the sport that evolved to the point where it drove the jujitsu guys out of it, as purists, and it drove them back into instruction, which is where they wanted to land anyhow. And you still have jujitsu gyms that make a ton of money off of MMA. It's a standard American model now.
Yeah, I personally hate American like BJJ. If it's just a sport that you want to do, like you play golf, or something like that, or like that's fine. But I really dislike they're preaching that like this fighting off your back like solves like all self-defense
I can
problems.
tell you this because I've been involved with promoting stick fighting, and I've been involved coaching for and fighting under people who were MMA fighters involved in promoting eskrima, weapon fighting, gladiatorial combat, and the main blocking force for the past 20 years in the promotion of contact weapon fighting as a sport and as a discipline and as a self-defense art have been BJJ people. Okay, I've been asked not to come back to gyms by the head guy that brought me in there because he wanted to promote weapon fighting because the BJJ guys complained about me and my guys scaring their people and scaring away their money people, thinking it's going to be a place where somebody's going to get hurt. They can tolerate boxing. They get all the way on the other side of the gym from me when I'm doing the boxing. All the jujitsu people go in the other corner. They can't get far enough away from boxing. Okay. But when the weapons come out, they actually start leaving. They start getting offended and leaving. Okay. Because they're openly terrified of it. And they come there to feel like tough guys. And now there's a BJJ black belt in Maryland who's a friend of a guy that I still coach for. And he used to pick fights with guys in bars in Anne Arundel County and tap them out, get them in triangles and everything. Well, he lost his spleen, part of a kidney, and part of his liver because the dude stabbed him.
Oh yeah.
Okay. Yeah, while he was slapping that triangle on him. So, but really, weapon fighting is dead in Maryland. Okay, largely because of BJJ. They won't let it in. They're bringing in the lion's share of the money. They see weapons come in, They asked the head guy to get the weapons out of there. And what do I bring in? I bring in maybe $80 a month with the weapon stuff. The BJJ guys are bringing in thousands a month with their stuff, because everybody that's afraid to get hurt, everybody's afraid to get hit. Everybody wants to think they got a magic bullet and they could take a knife away from you. Well, once they see what we're doing with the knives, they know they can't take the knife away from you. They know they can't invite us over there and say, let's do a drill, because they know they're going to get stabbed with a dull knife. And the whole house of cards is going to go away. Okay? So BJJ is currently in charge of maintaining the delusion of invulnerability in the American martial arts fraternity. They inherited it directly from karate. They took it from karate by the Gracie Challenge. And I know people did off-brand versions of the Gracie Challenge. And these same people are terrified of having me and my guys in the same building with them.
Well, I'm not a very good wrestler. Like, I mean, like I was able to beat the guys in my own weight class against varsity, but like going to tournaments, I would win 1 out of 3 or something. You know, I would lose more than I would win. And I'm only like 140 pounds, 45 maybe, at the time I did BJJ. And I would go and do BJJ, and I would just bring in a high school wrestling, hustle, or not hustle, pressure. Just like I would pressure with them, put a lot scrambles. They would bitch and complain, about that. They couldn't, they couldn't handle that. They couldn't handle like a crossface.
It was the same thing. It was the same thing mixing boxing with karate when I was your age. Okay, you get the same types of complaints because it goes against purism. Now, they will say like there's BJJ guys out there that I know and I train with who actually actively belong to BJJ clubs, and they do weapons and they box and they're studs. I mean, so. But they won't let weapons into those gyms. I mean, these guys have asked. It's like, hey, I trained with this guy that does weapons. Could we have him come in? He'll do a free thing. No, because these guys know that they don't have a weapon answer.
Right.
Okay. They know their stuff is BS when it comes to weapons.
Yeah.
Okay. And they don't want. They could. I know BJJ guys who have hurdled that. Instructor level guys who have hurdled that. Like I was telling you about Damien Kessel. Okay. This is. It's where money ruins everything. It's just about the money. It's about it. The money is always going to be with the non-combatant portion of the student body of the martial arts class.
Okay.
And it's a shame. I could go to a BJJ club and I could actually help them develop survivable knife defense. And I could help them develop pretty much ironclad blunt extension weapon defenses. Okay. But they'll never get there because they won't take the chance of the bruised ego. And I've been there. I was invited to a BJJ dominated MMA club, Carlson Gracie certified, to be the sparring coach. And I know these guys didn't really spar, so I didn't even bring gloves. All I had was batting gloves. And the head instructor made all 10 of his young men spar with me.
Okay.
And I told them all up. And I had to be quick about it because I was wearing no glove protection. Okay, I could easily get my hand shattered. So, I tried not to hit him too hard, but I beat him up. I beat up every one of these guys, right?
Right.
I'm a pot-bellied, 50-year-old guy.
Yeah.
So then he has his son, this guy's an MMA pro. He teaches the BJJ. He made his son fight me. And I didn't want to do it. I beat his ass. And this is a young professional fighter, stud. I beat his ass with a stick.
Oh, with the stick.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
I beat his ass with a stick. And I said, look, man, I said, and this guy is he's a certified Eskrima instructor.
Oh,
And
wow.
he's 30
Okay.
years old, and he's a total stud. I'd
Yeah.
last, I couldn't beat him in a boxing match, and I'd last 10 seconds with him in an MMA fight, okay?
Right.
All right? But uh, I bruised the ego. I took him aside. I was like, look, I'm sorry your old man made you fight me. I said, look, if you just sparred with me for 6 weeks, you'd be beating me every time out. But his ego couldn't take it. He never put defensive mask on again. He would never have anything to do with a stick. And he was instrumental in killing the weapon program.
Oh, that's a shame.
Okay. Because people saw this pot-bellied 50-year-old guy beat him up. I told him up. I mean, I was sparring 5 times a week. What else is going to happen? This guy was on paper was better with a stick than me. Okay. Uh, but he didn't have the power, and he had the pain tolerance because I, I ripped him up, and he never winced. He kept coming. I think I broke a bone in his hand. Okay,
Okay.
so and he had lacrosse gloves on. I didn't have gloves. All right, but that's the problem. The money with the ego and the mystique of like the undefeatable system. You know, so that's the whole problem with that, and that's why you're probably going to have guys look at that Pancratian stuff and poo-poo it and stuff like that and say, well, he could do that and he could do that, but they're also not going to get out there and risk getting eye gouged to experiment with it. And then on the other hand, you got there's guys that are willing to do gonzo stuff like that and actually get eye gouged. A lot of those guys aren't willing to take the common sense approach and say, okay, let's train the eye gouge without actually eye gouging each other. If you get the flat of a finger on my eye, I'm gouged because all you got to do is curl that finger and I'm gouged, right?
That
That's it. You could do that. You could do eye gouge grappling. We've done that before.
right.
But again, nobody, the guys that are gonzo enough to do the eye gouge, they don't have the control to meet the other guys halfway. So it's the permanent retardation. It has to do with ego and money.
Right. Right. Going off of your rule with the eye gouge, like the Japanese judo, like 100 years ago, it used to allow for like pretty much anything. So like you could, if someone tried to pull guard on you, they would pick the guy up and like spike him on his head, and people would die. So they enacted this rule that if the guy pulls guard and you pull him up to a certain level, a certain height, like above, maybe like he's above your head, and you're standing up, then you won the match. Because it was
Yeah,
assumed, yeah, you could spike him on his head and break his neck.
yeah.
Right.
That's
So,
realistic. So there's all as far as people that just want to be better at defending themselves. I'd encourage them to watch something like that Pancratian you're talking about, and then you can find a safe way to train it with decent guys.
right,
But you're not going to find it in a BJJ club because they're not going to allow it because just like they're not going to allow it in a traditional karate studio because it's the same thing. It's the monetization of purity of doctrine, which it really fits American metaphysics well because if you have the right political system, you got the perfect society. If you got the right economic system, you got the perfect society.
right,
There's this purity of doctrine that's kind of built into the American civic soul. So if you're going to sell something here, particularly something that's potentially dangerous that you have to sweat at, it might involve pain, but then you really need to achieve that purity of doctrine, or else you're just not going to get it. You're not going to thrive at the economic level that strip mall rent demands you thrive at.
right. Well, at least we have the Slavic people. They'll keep
Oh
the
yeah,
Slavic
yeah. Well,
movements.
we've got those to save us.
Exactly. Yeah.
And apparently it is. The term Slav comes from slave races. It was an ancient Roman term, and it was applied to everybody in that region because everybody you grabbed in Eastern Europe, you sold them. And it was traditionally where you would get strong laborers, hot, curvaceous, redheaded slave girls, heroic gladiators. It was a place where, when you bought a person rather than build a car, okay,
Right.
it's a place where you got your muscle cars, and sports cars, and your trucks,
Right.
when everything was muscle powered.
Right.
And then
Yeah.
slave comes around again uh, through the Punic languages, through the Arabic, uh, because again, the Arabs are getting all their prime slaves from Europe, and they're calling them slaves. And then it comes around into the English that way through the North Africa slave trade and Europeans. And then it gets into English that way. So it took me like 6 years to track the way slave got into English, because the Roman term that got directly into English was servant.
Right. Service. Right. Yeah.
Right, from servile. Okay, but the slave comes from Latin also, but it does an orbit all the way around the Mediterranean and then comes up through Morocco and Spain into England that way.
Okay.
Follows it, and finally gets there. You know.
That's really interesting. I need to go back and listen to this, but Father Matthew Raphael Johnson, some of our listeners might know about him. Yeah, like he's like a big promoter of Russian stuff, but he has this whole theory about like why the word Slav is not like derived from slave. But I've heard your explanation. Like I know it's like it's probably correct, but I need to go back and look at what.
I thought it was that there was some weirder podcaster actually did a good job of explaining it.
Okay.
I forget who he was. I forget who he was. He does history stuff. He's a European guy, and it was a podcast on why Eastern Europeans are so low trust. Okay, culturally, and see, I was originally able to track slave into the English from North Africa, from the Arab world, from the Ukraine. Okay, from Ibn Fawhil, the guy that is played by Antonio Banderas in The 13th Warrior, who is a real historical guy. Okay, so I was able to trace it from there. So
Okay.
I thought it was just, Arabic for these just Arabic using the term Slav for slave. But apparently the Romans really saddled them with that. They were the slave races. It is under dispute, but I had Lynn, my editor, look into it, and she said it goes way back. It's under dispute, but as far as she could trace it in the Latin realm, slave and Slav meant the same thing. Slave person, slave race.
Okay.
These people from here are natural born slaves. This is where we get our preferred slaves from.
Interesting.
Uh,
Yeah.
So, but in any case, it doesn't come into English directly from that route. It comes all the way around through the Muslim world and comes into the English as really meaning somebody that's really held in a completely unempathetic state of servitude. It's, the worst kind of servitude because you're being held by somebody of a different religion, a different race. Okay. So you don't even have like the co-religious or co-racial aspect of it to appeal to, that you're really out there. And it would be very similar to the Norse idea of thrall. Somebody that's never going to be permitted to get into free society. They're just outside of free society forever. So ultimately, I don't even think it's important.
It's certainly interesting. Yeah.
But it's interesting that the Slavs are taking up Germanic rebelliousness. Maybe it's through the long antagonistic contact with them.
Right, yeah. Yeah, between the Germans. I'm sure they have
because the Germans have become the least rebellious and most orderly people. But, you killed the millions of them that tried to rebel against the modern world in the teens, 20s, and 30s. So what do you expect?
Right.
You talk about genocide. You got one right there. I mean, they starved like 2 million of them to death in American prison camps after World War II.
Right.
So, not in America, but in Europe. They were well treated in America, prison camps in America, and they wanted to stay. But the ones that were imprisoned in Europe, Montgomery and Patton both complained about how badly the Germans were being treated. And that's where, when you see cases like that, like Andersonville, Andersonville was a notorious Confederate prison camp where a lot of Union men starved to death. Well, the guards were starving to death. The whole Confederate army was starving to death. The whole Confederacy was starving to death. So yes, Union prisoners are going to starve to death. But the Camp Lookout or Point Lookout prison camp for Confederates up in Maryland had just as high a death rate as Andersonville did, but it never got into any movies, history books, documentaries. Okay, there's a famous poet that died at Point Lookout, and a likeness of him is depicted at the Johns Hopkins campus on Charles Street and in Baltimore City. So in World War II, people that were held in concentration camps by the losers would be starving to death in droves. And of course, the losers would get blamed for it. But the winners that don't get blamed for the millions that they starved to death, they did it on purpose. So you'll have the people that didn't even have stuff to feed their prisoners being blamed. Okay, but the people that did have stuff to feed but withheld it, they don't get blamed. It's just the winner. That's what you get. The winners write history, and they don't have to erase it. All they have to do is accentuate the sins of the losers, and nobody will look for the sins of, the winners, except for the tiny minority and nuts who want to deny the sins of the losers. And then by denying the sins of the losers, then they invalidate their own pointing out of the sins of the winners. So it's a nice bipolar, situation that makes sure that actual historical records will never come to light and be viewed by the same people in the rational light of day.
Right. It's it's a very good psyop there.
Yeah, so it makes history fun for those tiny few people who actually want to discuss it.
Right. It's kind of like sometimes it's poisoning the well type, and and you get like some people that will believe in flat Earth. You get these people that will advocate probably very true conspiracy theories, but then they'll advocate some flat Earth, and then they're just labeled as a quack and stuff.
Yeah, so it's an inoculation,
right?
So I think the America has 95% herd immunity against reality. Okay.
Yeah.
I think that's been proven over the past 3 years.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So here we are, and there's the thing is the hero in this whole experience. The hero is now somebody that steps on a landmine or gets hit by an IED while they're trying not to get hurt in the process of obeying orders in order to save up money to get a college education on a GI Bill so they can get a decent job with medical and a retirement. Okay, a hero is now, in the modern parlance, a hero is a victim of circumstance, where the ancient Aryan hero is the person that goes against the status quo.
Right. Taking
That's
action, like,
that's they're
yeah.
going against their own corrupt leaders, and they're going against the enemy. Achilles, Odysseus, Aeneas, Beowulf, Roland. Roland's probably the most stellar example of this. Okay, where he disobeys orders, you know, for the man that gave him the orders. Okay, for his benefit, he's going to take one for the team even when he's told not to, because the team thinks they're safe and they're in friendly territory. And he knows better. He knows he's surrounded by the enemy and that they're lying. Yeah, so the real Aryan hero has something of the Native American trickster in him.
Okay, that's probably, I mean, whether or not the movie is historically accurate or not, the Michael Collins movie, like the IRA guy, I think that's probably why I like him so much. I mean, he seems to kind of fit, like, at least the story, the movie, like, fit the classic Aryan. He's like hero. He, like, goes against the establishment, the authorities, and obviously he's somewhat of a trickster because he's using guerrilla warfare, right? He's not necessarily fighting fair.
That's right. That's Odysseus poking the Cyclops in the eye.
Right.
And I really treasure the ancient myths for that.
Right.
My two favorite I can't tell you what my favorite are because it's the last one I listened to. So I'd really recommend Beowulf.
Okay.
For people that are really interested in what happens to the hero. Okay, the whole thing. We usually just get the part about the Grendel and his mother. Okay. But you listen to the full tale, and then he faces the dragon as well. And that's the thing that a lot of the classic Aryan heroes faced, including Heracles, and the many heroes of Ovid's Metamorphoses, which is really the classic canon of minor Hellenic heroes are preserved in Ovid's Metamorphoses. He was a contemporary of Christ and Paul.
Okay. Now this is something I asked you before off the podcast, about heroism. When did you? Well, before I ask you this question, I just want to say, like, I mean, as a kid, I thought of myself as a hero. I had this desire to be a hero. My grandfather is certainly, I think, a hero. My dad, I would say, is less of a hero than my grandfather, but far more of a hero, having the sense of a heroism in him than me. And I think, like, definitely around, maybe it was high school, I started to, getting bullied, but then there was this one time where there was this girl that liked me on the bus, and she was getting picked on. It was very odd, but she actually was kind of cute, and I did not defend her. I was a coward and let her get, like, verbally harassed, and that, I remember being a real, what's the word? That killed a lot of the hero in me. I felt very, like, ashamed, like a coward. And there's other times in my life that the hero kept dying more and more. I can't think of any others, but so that's my story of kind of how the hero died. Maybe some of the other times the hero died was when I lost in some competition fights and stopped practicing the combat arts too. That also killed a lot of the hero. But my question to you is, you've said quite a bit that you're not a hero. I think you have some sense of the hero in you still. You just maybe
I would place myself as an anti-heroic type.
Okay, maybe I said.
I don't even have the moral courage to write about current events and post to post in real time. Okay, if something happens this week and you want to find out what I think about it, you got to wait 8 months. Okay, that's not a lot of moral courage. Numerous times I've walked by women and children and weaklings who were being attacked, and I could have done something about it, and I coldly calculated that it was not in my best interest, and I continued on my way. And another little piece of the human inside of me died. And eventually, I killed most of that whimpering bastard off, and I'm pretty much like a machine now when it comes to that. So it's rare. So no, I don't really have much of anything heroic in me, and I never saw myself as a hero. I fantasized about it when I was a little boy. That's about it. But nothing ever. I never got a glimpse of myself as an actual hero, and it's made it fun for me to write heroes and fiction. I would say, if you want to look at and I'm going to have to go in a couple of minutes, but if you want to look at the quandary that the modern man is, who wants to have a sense of the heroic in him, I think it's one of the last few books of Ovid. Ovid wrote 13 books, I think, in his Metamorphoses. I think it's book 11. And it's about Hercules, or Heracles. Means here is honor. His birth was the father of the gods cheating on the mother of the gods, whose name was Hera. So his existence besmirched her very honor. He actually says a prayer to her as he's dying from the poison that got on. He killed the poison Hydra and used the poison in his arrows. Then he somehow the poison comes back to him through a trick played on him by a centaur, which is half man, half horse. He's dying in agony, and he's such a stud, he cuts down the timber for his own funeral pile.
Oh, wow. While
he's ranting at the gods. And he says, "O ye gods." And he's discussing his lot as the hero. And his lot is toil and suffering. Okay, so when you sell your soul to go to work, and you got to spend 30 years doing something you hate, working for people who hate you, doing something that's got no intrinsic value and just manages to keep your rental roof over your head and your leased car under your butt, that's really what I got out of Heracles, ranting at Hera, ranting at the mother goddess. That ultimately, if you want to take the goddess, particularly the mother goddess, this civilization, ultimately, its prime target is the hero. It needs to kill the hero in you. Okay, so if you can internalize your ideal of the heroic as what Heracles did, actually suffering through his many labors and his toils for the goddess. Okay, then you at least have that.
Right. Yeah, I mean, there's somewhat of a, like, Christianity has somewhat of this, the heroic, Christ suffering for his bride, the church, the feminine, the church. So maybe I'm wrong on that. But
Ovid's screaming for that. Ovid's actually, when you read the Metamorphoses, he's actually screaming for a Christ.
Okay.
And for a Savior. And he's writing at the same time that Jesus would have been alive. He's or about the time he was conceived, because Ovid's writing while Augustus is in power. And the life of Augustus, yes, Tiberius is the emperor when Christ is crucified, but the life of Christ straddles the reign of Augustus and Tiberius. It was the successor. So Ovid was a contemporary of Christ and would have been born before him, would have been about the same age as Virgil, who wrote the Aeneid. So, and if you listen to Metamorphosis, this is a pagan world that's actually begging for Jesus Christ to come. So, whatever
that's really interesting.
Part of the theological compass you come from, there's plenty of benefit to be had from listening to the Metamorphosis. And I'm going to have to sign off, bro.
Okay.
I got to take care of something. I'm squaring my quarters away, getting ready to move locations and head east. So I'm, got to get my living quarters squared away.
Okay, no problem. I'll finish it with what's best in life.
All right. Nice talking to you, man. Let me know when the link's up so I can post it.
Okay. It was great talking to you too, James.
All right, man. You take care.
You too.